Here at Espinosa, the story so far, hey, we're remembering to do this, just to check to see if the camera's working, if nothing else. The Spanish were in the midst of a withdrawal. They decided they had to stand and fight because they couldn't keep retreating faster than the French could chase them. And that's the beginning situation of the battle. French troops come in. They smashed through Quintana de Los Prados. They smashed through it very easily and then came up to a line that was formed here between retreating units and reinforcing units, and they were stopped cold. They kind of fell back a little bit, refusing a flank, but it quickly became obvious they were going to be surrounded. They actually failed their attack stoppage check, but would have done an emergency withdrawal anyway, and retreated back into this area here. The Spaniards moved almost all of their forces except the Del Norte division, which is their best division, but had been standing at Quintana and got pretty heavily used, and formed a line up here. They considered pursuing. Meanwhile, overnight, all the French forces have come into play. Victor is giving orders to his forces to do a coordinated assault beginning at dawn, which I'm going to put at this 7:30 a.m. 3 visibility turn. Not using any kind of foot dragging rules because they aren't in the 3.0 rules, although I think they probably should be. Yet there's still usually enough time for orders to arrive and for a coordinated attack to come. It's likely to happen, though, in this case, because the orders started going out right around midnight. And both armies have recovered pretty much all of their stragglers. I think all of them. And are in good order. It's just a matter of when the daylight comes, what happens. Note is that the Spaniards are actually defending the town of Quintana. Towns in this version 3 rules are really iffy to defend in. They provide a sort of mixed set of benefits and disadvantages. They're not good for a solid line. Like, if this was a thin line, it would be no good at all, but I'm thinking the depth in there might actually provide a situation where there's just going to be the kind of brutal fighting that you should have seen in Aspern, in the Aspern-Essling battle. But the French had too thin a line to really be able to create that kind of depth. So we'll see if this works a little bit better, because what happens is you probably can plow the first unit in, and then you can attack the second unit immediately, but you may not be in great shape going in for that second attack after you've taken some hits on the first attack. But we'll see. 4 a.m. turn, the French have accepted all their orders, so their attack is ready to go as soon as dawn actually happens. On the Spanish side, I got a random event. This is an interesting one. It's not going to have an effect. It's Acevedo pulls out. If the French control at least one of the VP city hexes in Espinosa, back here, there's 3 of them there, I guess. I'm not sure if this one counts. Like, there are 3 victory point hexes near Espinosa. One of them is in the town. The other 2 are outside. Do those other 2 count? Since it says one of, I assume so, but who knows. Acevedo or his lieutenants, should he have been killed, decides to leave the army of Galicia to fend for itself and head back. He immediately accepts an order to lead his divisions off the map. Only the exceptions of an IPV order from Blake and no one else to halt will cancel this event, and the order must be accepted before the last Astorian unit has left the board. Exiting Astorians count normally as exited for victory point purposes. That could be a pretty major impact, but obviously I'm way up here. It's here. It's really kind of impressive because all I've been doing is rolling for random events with each unit. There's really nothing else. Oh wait, hold on. Nope, I got all the Del Norte as well. Yeah. All I'm doing is rolling for random events on every single turn. So that's that's the way I like games to go. Nothing happens. French were cowering behind streams almost everywhere. I marked one with a shaken for crossing this stream, but basically almost every single unit was marked shaken. I don't want to attack in shaken formation, so I simply move up to here. I believe the orchards there prevent the artillery from firing. It wouldn't do much if it was, so maybe I'll just roll. I'm at range 3 with a 2-point gun. Yeah. Let me make a roll and see if anything would have happened. No. So it's easier to just roll the dice for the combat and then look up to see if the terrain chart is so big and so messy for this particular type of map with all these different elevation levels and everything. So among other things, I'm not sure what the line of sight situation of orchards is. I know they're blocking terrain, but I don't know what that matters if I'm on a hill slope. It looks to me like, you know, it would be still blocking. I just don't want to look up all that crap, you know? There's almost nothing in this game. There's one unit in this game, unless the optional guns come in, which is this artillery, which has to worry about line of sight at all. So, like, dealing with all this complex terrain is not that bad in general, although it's a fucking pain when I'm moving, because I got to count all the different elevation levels in each hex. Again, I really like, I know those old maps were considered hideous looking, the old layer cake ones, where there'd be, you know, a ridge placed on the hex side to indicate things. And now I'm dreading, because I know everything's going to hit. I'll finish the Spanish turn where nothing's going to really happen, but I gotta check the line of sight again. I don't know. Fuck. Or roll again and ignore it. Oh, a 2's not a good result, is it? 2's fine on the one table. Okay. There we go. Got to check for random event as well. Okay. But I'm going to hold off because it's been so easy. I ran through several hours. It doesn't feel like there's much game left either. When does this battle end? Yeah, I'm assuming dark, but but you know, okay, so they say 4 p.m. But honestly, for these kind of tactical multi-day battles or whatever, it is quite possible that you could play them out into extra days. That's why, you know, like the CWB Thunder at the Crossroads has rules, hey, extend Gettysburg a 4th day. It's often the case. Now, in this one, another day of rest, and I would say the Spaniards probably just want to get out of here. They didn't really want to fight here. It's why I'm a little iffy about, like, why I'm still here, you know, since I got that event that allows me to pull out or whatever. I wasn't going to play with it as a straight up rule, but when I have it, it's kind of my goal is to just get out of here without getting hurt. But the victory conditions are such that would be a minor loss. And given that I did okay on that first day, and I hurt the French a lot, I feel kind of like, yeah, you know, the army is thinking, let's see if we can trounce the French again. In the midst of, I probably should have scattered my skirmishers so that I could get an initial fire, but I didn't do so. Kept them tight in, which is probably a mistake. I still get the skirmisher advantage across the board, though, which is nice. But except for really Montebello, Austerlitz had terrain too, but it was not this type of map. We haven't had to deal with the new terrain on a using version 3.0's rules. The new terrain came out with 3.0, but yeah, I mean, and we'll get some in Talavera as well in the two scenarios for that. But this one is particularly, there's just tons and tons of terrain contours all over the place on this one. Probably the worst of the bunch. And this causes an issue. So I know that there's a bonus. You make your check to stand often in order of whoever's on the higher terrain. Question is, what does that mean? Well, the rules define it perfectly fine, and we'll get to that in a moment. But my feeling would be, hey, it should have to do with how you're entering. So here I'm entering from this low terrain and maybe going uphill to this higher terrain if these guys were in the most defensible place. That is not how it's read. The way the rules actually read, if the attacker entered from a hex that had a higher elevation than the combat hex, the defender checks first. If it ended with a lower top elevation than the combat hex, the attacker checks first. This does not fit, any kind of conception of reality. So what's going on here is I'm actually going up a slope here. If these guys are, up on this side of things, which would only make sense, I think. But there's a little bit of hill right here that's a little bit higher, way up here, and that's good enough. Now, I don't think this is reasonable. I think the way it should be determined is more, a common sense sort of, hey, where are you crossing from? If I'm crossing from lower terrain up into higher terrain, which is what it looks like here, I should get the disadvantage. I don't know if I'm gonna mod the game that way, but by the actual rules as written, the fact that there's a higher hill somewhere up here means that essentially these guys are at the base of that in this hex and not in this hex. If you try to use reason to make things make sense, it just doesn't fucking work. There's another annoying aspect of it, which is I have to keep track of what hex units came from. Now, that was never a problem in the old system or in the CWB system where you handled melee combats as they happened. The problem here is they all get taken care of in the close combat phase here after non-phasing fire and movement and whatnot. They used to happen during the movement phase, where it was pretty easy to remember what's going on. You move a unit in, you attack. Now, there were other bad effects to that. This was the right way to go, I think, but it is, again, like many things in this system, mechanically more complicated than, the old system used to be. Issues, and this kind of makes sense too. I'm using a unit to screen the artillery. It moved in, it got lucky, didn't get hit by the canister shot. Artillery takes place as I'm moving. It's opportunity fire. I had to hold until I got into the hex or made a declaration I was going elsewhere. But you'll notice another thing, which is that, and I don't know if it's this one, no. The Spaniards were behind another streamline, which means I could have just charged in the turn earlier. I didn't realize that was there. And yeah. Although honestly, what actually happened in the game makes more sense. You march through one stream, you're not in great shape. It makes sense to reform, even if you're going to have to hit through another stream. But the effects aren't cumulative, which is to say they just cause a shaken result when you go through, the water hazard. What the mess looks like afterwards. I tried to go around the stream up here, which left me with not enough movement points without doing a forced march. I don't want to do one. I have the advantage in terms of skirmishers, so You've got kind of a neat situation there, even though I don't, part of me says, hey, plow into these weak units, force them back. But if I was, I'd have to go in shaken, and I would be just as bad or almost as bad in morale as they are. And as it is, I'll be able to get fire combat on them on their next turn if they don't withdraw. Decided reason is going to dictate here. I am not going to give the advantage to the French for there being a little bit of hill up here. I'm going to give the advantage to the Spaniards, say that they had the room to fall back to the heights. Does that make sense or does it not? Well, you've got to assume that even if these are the same height down here, there's a gradual down slope and then an up slope going up into that. So even if they're right at the edge of the hex, it would still be fighting their way uphill as far as I'm concerned. This fits more into the way the old system used to determine line of sights, which had to do with there's a crest of the hill that would be midway across, the length of the highest, the width of the highest terrain. It's very similar to that. And I just feel a lot more comfortable with that than the idea that, yeah, well, there's a hill up there and I got a lot of momentum from charging down it that, my little wheels are still running pretty fast when I hit the upslope. Partway through and you can see what a fucking mess it's turning into. What we have is the Spaniards kind of holding along here. These guys got routed through. But these guys repulsed the enemy. Over here, these guys repulsed an enemy, but they've been pushed around and kind of, that's the whole Asturian army, which is pretty much just falling apart. It can attack if you bloodlust them, but you can't bloodlust units and prepare them for defense. So it's really, really weak on defense. Should have been in the village. That would have been the strongest place for it. And that is why I'm looking at this video even before I've done the last couple of attacks here, which is, I may have misread this, my shitty handwriting. It's attacking a line in town village. I may have read it as attacking in line into a town or village, which also would probably be, but the idea is that if something's deployed in line, that's the formation where maybe you're spread out and whatever and taking whatever cover you can properly, as opposed to column where you're able to move in the villages. Well, that means that villages are essentially a better defensive location. Now, there's already attacking in line has a penalty. But yeah, I think in Aspirin Essling, I may have ignored that modifier, which, means that A quality units, B quality units with a leader are able to essentially just win automatically. There's no automatic victory. Well, an A with a leader would be able to, because they would be able to cancel that out. But yeah, it's enough to make a difference, and that's why the French were driven back. Although actually it was a B quality unit without a leader that got hit, that got knocked back here. That's this disordered guy got knocked here. This guy got knocked back, but he ended up routing the enemy anyhow. Not a town fight. That charge worked really well against the army of Asturias. Everywhere else, it kind of got stymied. Both the village hexes turned them back. Now, not everything in here is Asturian units that have routed, but basically the flank where the Asturians were got smashed pretty hard. Up here, not so much. There is another modifier that's a little tricky to cope with, and I'm not sure what to do. In some of these places, it has opponent at different elevation. I don't even know what that fucking means, right? You're in the same hex, essentially. And elevation changes happen midway through a hex. So if you're moving from one hex to another, the elevation is the same. Let me see if this tells you anything about how to cope with that. It only happens on the firefight table. It's used for both sides in a firefight if the hex the attacker came from has a different top elevation. Okay. Technically, I probably had some of it, but dealing with elevations in this game, recognizing them, seeing all that, fuck it, I can't cope with it. Again, you know, it kind of makes sense, but it kind of doesn't. It's like trying to, it works. A lot of the modifiers and the rules for this system actually work better with that layer cake model, where your elevation is fixed. You know what it is, you know the hex you're coming from has one elevation, the hex you're going into has one elevation. What is it? You know? And when they started adding these slopes in, man, and the thing is, the two were added together. The change in rules where elevations, they may have been in the old system as well, but they worked there. And they kind of don't work right here. The top elevation is different. Well, again, the top elevation in a hex is not necessarily showing what is actually happening on the field. And that's really troublesome. In general, I'll try to give that when I can remember it. It only shows up on the firefight table, which means both sides stood. Never can happen in a village, thank God. But yeah, it's going to be, that's going to be one that I think I'll have to follow the rules explicitly by, because I can't think of another way of coping with it. It's basically my way of looking at things, where I'm looking at it from, okay, if I'm going from here to here, I'm going uphill. There's no question of that. There's an elevation line. The defender is placed there. That makes sense, and that would work in either case. If I'm going from here to here, we're at the same elevation. Makes sense, again. But what doesn't make sense is like the one instance that I showed, where there's like some little spur that's higher elevation, but not really connected to where the attack's actually happening. That's more troublesome. And where did I just have that? I had that here. This was the one where I had a firefight where it might have been that. So this has a hill at that elevation. And this, I think, is the same elevation. It's hard to fucking see. There's so many little squiggly lines all over the fucking place. This is the final situation for the French turn. I'm exhausted. Fighting, you know, a big fighting turn in this new version of the rules is just so painful because everything is close combat. Close combat's painful. I've gone over that before. This unit, I believe you're allowed to rally. I think I checked this before. You're allowed to rally as long as you're not in the zone of influence, the front hexes of something. And this guy basically cleared by attacking this way. I thought I'd clear this hex. I think I did this attack after I did that one or something. I wanted to get the gun out of the way. That was here. You know? So the order I did them in determined what my facings were going to be in terms of, yeah, I want to face that way. Well, yeah. So, although I may have actually done this first, because I've got this unit kind of pinning him down. But I believe he's able to rally, and everything else, though, is in a zone of influence, which means it couldn't rally. Now I have to figure out what the fuck the Spaniards are going to do, and I'm not up to it. But again, these bigger counters on top, the tiny counters in and of themselves are problematic that I created, and then the bigger counters on top of them, because there aren't any morale state counters that came with the set, the print and play, which I think doesn't really make sense. I don't remember if Montebello had any. Let me check that, because that I also printed too small. Only one unit dissolved entirely. Kind of impressive, but you can see the Army of Astoria. No, that's the Diennes. The Army of Astoria is A couple of the units are pretty badly beaten. 3 of the units are pretty badly beaten. 2 of them have held up pretty well. Everything else held up okay, except for the 2nd Division, Segovia, one of those units, and that's one that routed as well, dissolved. Now on the French side, everything kind of took a few hits across the board, but nothing's too badly beaten up. There might be something wrecked though. Yeah. The 63rd 3-1, wherever the fuck that is wrecked. Probably one of those disordered units. I'm guessing this one because it's 3-1, so it was on that side. That's one thing. I had the most beat up French units facing the Asturian army, which, you know, I thought would work well because they're facing the weak part of the Spanish line. I mean, it wasn't intentional or anything. It's just the way things ended up. The Asturians were given orders to move to the south for whatever reason. And that's where the 3-1 was. And they did. They did their job, but no one else really was able to do their job. And so the other units have gotten flung back and are in kind of a troubled position now. I'm trying to trim the Spanish line, and we kind of pulled back out of here. We could do that because the French here are disordered, and this French unit is facing this way, so it wasn't projecting a zone of influence. This one's facing this way, again, no zone of influence, so I was able to slip back across the stream there. Elsewhere, it looks like, you know, it would be a good opportunity to come out and attack the French. The problem is the French are holding higher ground or equal ground and are larger forces, and so I'd have to make morale checks with the Spaniards first. So hitting those disordered units is likely to break the Spaniards. So I'm kind of locked in place here. I don't feel like I have an advantage elsewhere. And now I guess the French will just shoot back with their skirmishers. Asturian army units, well, whatever units fell back here did a remarkably good job considering how bad their morale is. Basically, they needed 6s. There were leaders involved, though. So 5s or 6s in each of these cases, where they got 3 successes, which is kind of impressive, actually. But yeah, we lost that one hex we had moved into and routed through something, causing problems. That whole Spanish position is looking iffy. I don't know what my orders are like. So I have complex orders for the reserve and the 1st Division. But I think those are my only complex orders I have. And neither of them had undergone fire yet. But the reserve's in the line now. The 1st is not so much. The reserve had to cover over here. Back to Espinosa, but haven't done anything yet. I've been out for about a week, just sick, runny nose, snots, all that shit, and that shit. But I think I'm well enough to not drip on the map. And it doesn't seem like I'm developing too much of a cough. So, even though I just went out dancing last night. But being away from the game a little bit, it's going to be a little tough picking up again. So the French managed an attack success here. They got battered back here and routed. Succeeded in this village. That was just a couple of skirmishers. I decided to try to stand with them. Ended up being a bad idea. The French had a morale, so. So here's the problem with this game, is if you can paw through the enemy's stack, right, you could see that it had an A morale. I think there always used to be prohibitions in all of Dean's games, really, that you can't paw through the enemy's stacks. And I'm assuming those stayed. I didn't go look that one up. But if you can't paw through the enemy stack, what you don't get to know is the size of the enemy force approaching you, which is something which really should be apparent, right? You might make an argument that in village fighting, maybe it's not that clear. But in general, you would be able to tell the size of the force facing you. And I've argued about this before. The only thing that really works well with that is minis. Minis, you can see how many figures are coming at you. And you can be like, oh my God, that's a big force, You might also be able to recognize the unit by the uniforms to some extent. And which might give you some quality ideas. If you see Zouaves coming, not in this era, but you're like, oh, those are probably pretty good units, or if you see the Russian guard in their white uniforms coming, that's different. It's different from the standard. You don't know if, you might not know if it's good. Anyway, so we managed to destroy both the skirmishers there. That was pretty trivial. Over here, we routed the Spaniards and moved forward. And now, because you can rally in a zone of influence, that creates a kind of interesting situation. We didn't face it here, but where two forces are disorganized, like if you make an attack and both sides are disorganized and you fall back, your unit actually gets to rally to Shaken. And the enemy will never get to rally as long as he's in your position. It gives a slight advantage to the attacker in that condition. There might be other situations where things feel a little less reasonable, but I can kind of understand hey, you were disorganized, but you're not undergoing continuous fire, so you're able to reform before the enemy who's defending can do so. You could make some kind of argument in that direction. I don't know if, I don't know how much sense it makes, but because you could equally make an argument that, we repulsed the enemy, we should get kind of a morale boost out of that, and us reforming might be easier. As it is, it just feels a little weird, but it's okay. And Victor went and rallied this unit, but this one's routing in behind it. And now we go to 830 Spanish side. And the Spaniards look like they're being overwhelmed in the Quintana defense line. And the problem is I no longer have the flexible kind of orders I had. I gave myself defend orders so that, I wouldn't have to make core complex order stoppage checks or whatever. And that puts me in the bolted down type situation. Even if I don't absolutely rigorously hold to the bolting down, I believe that a real defend order should not have a lot of flexibility as to where the forces can move. What it means in this system with the bolting down the way it's supposed to be, the way the rules are written, is that you got one unit with the commander in it, and that unit will not move. That unit will stay where it is. Whereas other units, can do kind of localized attacks and such not. But if the commander's thrown back, well, now he's bolted down in the new hex where he fell back to. It doesn't really work, but there's no easy way of expressing within the rules the kind of, hey, you're on defend orders, you really shouldn't keep advancing, right? Spanish side of things, not a hell of a lot happened. They don't have much they can do. We had some rallies going on. You can see we're in better shape here. But here, tried to back up. Thought about my cav. It couldn't make an attack. The hills pretty much prevent it from doing so. I might be able to get an attack in here. Honestly, I think I'll stay back. Well, no, because that's across the stream. This terrain is just so horrible for cavalry that Spanish cav is almost useless. But I'm kind of caught, in places where there's not much I can do. If I tried to move a unit, it would rout. And that might be for the best, but I find that hard to do. I feel like it shouldn't even be allowed. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to voluntarily rout in that sort of way. Instead, the troops would probably be hunkering down and quite likely, in all honesty, would surrender in this kind of situation. French skirmisher fire, it didn't do a lot. It drove one unit back, but otherwise it was not very effective. Between the components, the tiny pieces, the morale pieces that are too big for them, and everything else that I'm dealing with here, it's really being a pain. But also this sort of close-in conglomeration. This is as tough a little fight that's happening here as I think I've seen in any of the games in the series so far. So it's really like compacted, and there's a lot of effort to put into operating this. So I will wander back downstairs. Right, in the 9 a.m. turn, the French push further into the town, driving the Spaniards away. And they also have this guy sneaking up behind. They're really... it's an ugly situation for the Spanish. It really is. This is the clearest case of, hey, we're surrounded and we should withdraw that I've seen, but it's ugly to withdraw under these conditions. It's ugly to fight too. But like this guy is keeping these two in disordered state, which was kind of important. Now I think I've got to get out of there. On the more personal side, something big hit the house. I assume, a rather large branch or something came down. But I'm just terrified after that 1 year, and mainly I'm worried right now. It seems, structurally to be able to handle these big hits, which is kind of weird, but I guess it's the alpine shape, that it deflects them just like armor would. But man, my weatherhead took a bend on the last one, and several years back, and I'm just, expecting my power to go out, and maybe that would start a fire or something. Who knows? It wasn't compromised, but it looks kind of funny, and I'm not sure it's safe, or as safe as it could have been. I don't know. So the Spanish Reserve and, the Spanish Reserve pulled out. It had a failure. The 3rd Division voluntarily failed, pulling a unit out of there back to here, I don't know which. An attempt at forming another line back here near the Loma del Atac, which is worth a point, is being made. But it looks flimsy. The question comes down to, how is the French force? None of it's wrecked. None of the divisions are wrecked. But some of them are kind of chewed up and might need to rest a little bit. Giving them a rest, given that they have better morale, probably means that they will recuperate more quickly than the Spaniards do. And let's see, we got this. This is the reserve unit that's in the front still. That it ran as far as it could legally. The Cav's still patrolling there, and everything. There was something here, part of the 2nd Division, but it's not the commander. So he actually had to run back without a failure or anything, and he was routed running through all kinds of zones. So that whole Spanish line is largely collapsed. We still got a couple of units in the front to be abused. I should be facing this way. French push forward, recovering morale states, whatnot, destroyed this unit with a couple of stragglers on their own loss. But this is a Spanish unit that remains. It got hit by the bloodlusted guys here, who fell back. That ended up being a shootout, which, when you're looking at a disordered enemy and everything, wow, that seems unlikely. And they actually had to check morale first, but They stood. And not really where I want to be, but not much choice when it comes down to, you take the randomness of the attack roll. It's dawn is happening. I tried to go to sleep. I slept for a while, maybe an hour and a half or so, and then got back up and then tried to go back to sleep and failed, which is probably all for the good because I have an interview at like 7 tomorrow. So this is about, it's a little after 7 now. I had to look, see what fell on the roof. I'm at the 9:30 Spanish turn. By the way, it's beautiful out. I'm gonna try to get out at least for a half hour or an hour walk or something. I'm supposed to go snowshoeing on Wednesday, so that'll be one thing. But man, that's gonna wipe me out, given how little exercise I get other than dancing and shopping. Okay, but anyway, the unit here, basically Spanish are trying to reform their lines. I haven't done the morale recovery yet. But there was a unit here, and it's routed to here, as best as I can tell, and it's not absolutely clear. So if a unit can't retreat the required number of hexes, it's removed, and the casualties would be disappeared. But the way it's worded is the first 2 hexes of a retreat must be further away from the cause of the retreat. I guess they are. I mean, this one goes into here, which is not further than this. The cause of the retreat is these skirmishers firing from all around. Now, this would be the case even if there weren't formed units, and the formed units are facing the other way and everything. If there weren't any formed units involved in this, and I have a really tough time believing that a cloud of skirmishers is going to capture a large unit. I don't accept that. But let's go on, because that would be the case anyway if a unit was actually surrounded by skirmishers, although that's a little bit more believable. Okay. Unless the cause was further away than 2 hexes, i.e. artillery fire. In the case of a close combat, the first hex has to be the hex it came from for the attacker. For the defender, it must not be adjacent to the hex the attacker came from. No hex entered during the retreat may be closer to enemy combat units within 4 hexes than the previous hex. I think that latter part I'm safe with. But it depends, because I've gotten closer to these combat units in specific. But the thing I'm most disturbed with is that first one, that I could not retreat. The cause of the retreat was these 3 hexes. So my first hex of retreat would probably have to be that way. You know what? I'm going to say the unit is actually destroyed, because I think that is the valid case. I think this goes into here as no, because that's not any further either. Yeah, basically the fact that I'm surrounded this much, and given that there's formed units around it, I don't mind that at all. I thought I was slipping out of here by following the rules to the letter of the law, and now I'm seeing that, I really am not. But, if there was a little bit less units, yeah, there would have to be a lot less units there. Okay, all right, so we'll destroy a unit. This is the first time I've seen a unit destroyed that I can recall. But this was also the closest to really being encircled that I've seen in the game. The unit I just destroyed had 3 stragglers. Those remain, and this unit can be recreated still. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out of those stragglers, the unit as a whole isn't completely destroyed, even if, you could probably make a pretty good argument that it shouldn't be able to reform, when its center is just completely wiped out, because quite a few strength points went away. We were talking about, like, I don't know, five strength points or something like that got marked off as permanent casualties. It's permanently wrecked. and this is really most of the combats that I see in this system, units kind of get worn out, they get beaten up, they fall back, and then they don't want to fight again. You don't bring them back into the line. So they're not in a position where you get permanent wrecked units very easily. Now, over in CWB, I would see it in some of the big battles like Thunder at the Crossroad, which is Gettysburg, where units were getting permanently wrecked. But I was probably over exerting units because I was getting casualty numbers across the board that were higher than actually happened in the battle. And there's sort of a safety valve on that in this system. Beyond writing orders for your units and things like core attack stoppage that greatly reduce the amount of casualties that you suffer over the whole battle by reducing the amount of effort that units are willing to make throughout the battle. The victory conditions set in most of these games are based on permanently wrecked formations. If you permanently wreck a formation, you take a big penalty on that. And so you really don't want to fight with something that's been through the ringer already. You really want that to only be, delegated to some sort of reserve task that is simply not going to get them into the line of main fighting unless things are so very bad, or they might get you, they might end up being in the way of, a small cav raid or something like that, but end up protecting your supply wagons or something for that. Anyway, here's our final position. Now, I wanted to come back because not much has changed, obviously, because of the special case of this. The French could be a real dick here if you're playing by the rules as written, which is they could not step on this thing and just avoid it. I'm not going to do that. I feel like you should be able to at any time say, hey, my headquarters was overrun, even though you didn't stand on it, and fling it back. Because as it stands, if I just leave that there, back there, then Blake would be at a significant disadvantage. He would actually kind of have to run through enemy lines to go give an order to the headquarters, which would be impossible. But he could write them orders to reform. You could make an argument that, yeah, they should be penalized in that way, but the difference is whether or not they step on it. Does it make that much sense that this massive capability to kind of screen off the headquarters is sufficient to require that Blake write written orders, which will take a longer time to happen? Actually, no, it's Victor who wrote orders to his headquarters. And I mean, yeah, you can make an argument that the situation is so dire here, that these are so cut off, that that's why I'm capable of not having to step on it. But you kind of never have to step on it. I don't know. I'm going to debate to myself whether or not I'm going to follow the rules as written, which greatly penalize a headquarters that is not forced back, but is rather bypassed in a situation. I can see arguments why they should remain as is. It's not that huge a disadvantage. It just means that Blake's going to have very little chance. He can't write orders to anyone, and he hasn't given any orders since he last stepped on it. So he can give orders to one of his little divisional commands, and then he's out. He's done until he gives orders to this. Now, you can't give. Here's the problem: you can't write orders to that. You have to go to it, and That's unbelievable. Yeah. So I think I'm going to have to fling it back on the French turn. Just say, look, you know, because otherwise Blake will have to risk his own existence, and I don't know. I don't know if there is any real risk. Like, I'm not usually moving my commanders around. I think they just get flung back someplace. Yeah, they go to the nearest stack of their command. Which, yeah, I basically what would happen, here's what would happen. Blake on his turn, and he may just do this on this turn, does this one, I guess 1, 2, 3, this probably 4, 5, I'm not going to look it up, 6, 7. Okay, stupid. Try this one more time. I've recorded this twice. First time went about 5 minutes before it failed. Then the next time, less than a minute. This headquarters here is kind of abandoned behind the lines. With the rules as written, it wouldn't be able to withdraw unless Blake moves up to it and gives it orders. That's what I'm doing. It feels a little funky to me. It feels like the rules are forcing me to do. There's no real danger to Blake, right? He's on his own. Leaders on their own can't be hurt. But, which, you know, there may be some weird levels of abstraction going on here. But it does feel like the wrong thing is happening. Blake wouldn't necessarily walk up here. If the French step on that headquarters, it's flung back. Automatically, that's the best result possible. The next best result is that Blake walks up to it as he's done and issues it orders on his next turn. By him being there, the French might as well step on it. Although actually it's still a little worse for the Spaniards to have him stuck back there trying to reorganize his headquarters and run it behind, run it behind the enemy. It's just a totally fucked up situation where nothing real is being portrayed. It looks like the camera's taking on this one. What I'd like to do is just say, screw it, the French have to walk through it, or the Spaniards could say, no, I got overrun or whatever. But I'm moving Blake up there because if I decide I'm playing by the rules as written, he absolutely has to be there in order to issue it orders, because he has no headquarters from which he can write orders and send it to. And that's not special to this game. He has to be on his own headquarters to write orders. For a tiny walk, like 15 minutes, just around the block, basically. Big block, but picked up a couple of books. Here we are on the 10 a.m. turn for the French, and they pushed hard with mixed results. The French army is running out of gas. That's the problem. If we look at the 3rd Division, which were the guys who were first here, they're wrecked now with a permanently wrecked unit. Again, that's a rarity, but this is a very, very bloody battle. There's not a lot of units on it. They're kind of small. I mean, they're not tiny, but, you know, they're just barely in the AB for the larger units. So yeah, they took some significant hits, and honestly, the rest of the command is kind of iffy too. You can see 2nd Division is holding up. They've got another push in them, and they are over here on the right flank. The center is the 1st Division, and that is pretty close to wrecked. Two of the 3 brigades are wrecked already. I don't think I have a lot more in me, and I think I need to stop and recuperate. A couple of these units were routed, you know, broken units launching attacks, flung way back. but they were able to recover the high morale and whatnot. The guns, they were dislodged. Their canister fire did nothing whatsoever. Yeah, or grape shot. And sort of a really a mixed result with a push here. This was able to recover because this guy's facing the wrong way, protecting his flank, but it was probably dumb. It's one of those things I got to get kind of used to is, yeah, you really don't want to. There's flank protection as such in this. So under the old system where firepower was a lot more important, and you tended to move up next, or at least I tended to move up next to people, sit there and launch shots at them. Flank attacks were a big deal, but this would have been protected under that old system. Under this system, the problem is the morale recovery. The morale recovery is the real place where you get to inflict damage at a distance. Is, you launch an attack, either a close assault or you're using your skirmishers or whatever, and maybe you decrease their morale, but in this case, this unit was able to launch an attack against this, disorder it, it fell back, shaken, but because this guy's facing like it would under the old design, it really, and I really didn't need to protect the flank. This terrain's tough enough to move through that no real attack was going to happen. The only real attacks in this game are the close combats, and they're the only ones where direction matters, and there is no flanking effect here. The only flanking effect is you were attacked in one of the rear two hexes, or hex sides, which, means that there's basically no chance to get around and hit somebody from behind without stuff. The cav was chased away. It wasn't attacked. There was a breakthrough here. This is a disordered French unit, which should no longer be disordered because it also is not in a zone. And the question is which way I wanted this thing facing. I don't know. There's really no threat from in front, and I can reface it. So I think I'm going to actually face it this way in case that thing turns around and tries to fight me. But yeah, there's really just not a lot left for the French. And yeah, the Spanish are pretty close to demolished. You can see all the eliminated units on the track. Those are going to be hard to recover. You can see all the markings here in terms of permanent casualty and permanently wrecked units. I think we only have a couple, but there's a lot that are close. But you don't want to be launching attacks with, certainly not with wrecked units. If they have to check their morale, they're at a significant disadvantage. And with the non-wrecked units, if they're close to being wrecked, it's time to regroup and try to fix things together, try to get things into better shape. So I think the French attack is mainly petering out. There's a possibility this division might continue to fight a little bit longer, try to gain a little bit of additional advantage. But it might be best for me to pull back and recover the entire core, and because honestly, I'm down one division. There's no question of that. This third division is just, it's not really capable of continuing to push. It's going to be too expensive to do so. The second doesn't have a hell of a lot left in it, even if it recovers. Well, nah, it's as good as the third was after the first day. The first is no, the second's in good shape. The first is it's not in great shape. It could certainly provide some supporting role, but it's not enough to attack on its own. And I really think it may be best for me not to wear out the second, to try to gain some useless terrain up here, when maybe I can get some more. So far, I'm not getting a lot in terms of terrain, but I'm doing a lot of damage, and that may equal out in terms of the loss ratios. In terms of saving the army, I feel like Blake should have withdrawn. You know, it's sort of the, yeah, I should have taken, remember I got the option that gives me the may withdraw, which it's kind of weird. It's like you can buy these options and or they come up on the, well, and they show up on the random events charts. And I'm not sure what the integration of those two things are. The optional guns seems to, hey, I've been forgetting to roll them. Nope. But yeah, I've been completely forgetting that I need to roll for those reinforcements. I didn't pay the point for them, so I don't know, but whatever. I figure if they never come in, you shouldn't be charged for them. And I'm not sure how useful they are. This terrain is so bad for artillery. But attacking artillery tends to have to get pretty close. Yeah, it can soften up the line from a distance, but its best use is to park it right behind an attack, fall back on it, and then, you know, unleash on the next player turn. All right. Addiction made hard demands on me today in terms of time, so I didn't get to play much, but I pushed one more little Spanish half turn in or whatever, and you can see they're trying to fall back. The center's in trouble though. I've got a unit facing this way to deal with this problem, but then he's exposed in the other direction, and this is just one of the issues that happens. These guys fell back and are putting a threat on this. If the French fall away, I should be able to rebuild a line, but this may be too tempting. So I don't know, if I have the opportunity to keep fighting, I may do so. First division's not in good shape though, and third is wrecked, so I don't know. I think chances are that the French are indeed going to fall back and give some ground to give some space for the Spanish to build this line. The artillery recovered, the horses are recovered, so maybe we can do something with them. The horses, I mean, other than a couple of hexes in here, the horses are fucking useless. So I just don't know. I mean, they're not. You know, there's hexes in here that they're okay in too. But basically anything, I think, with more than, how many lines? What do they mean? So 2 level hex, 1 line in it. Anything with more than, with more than 2 lines. No, more than 1, because H is hindering, that means no charges. So yeah, anything with more than 1 line, they're out of play for, which means there's very little that they can actually operate on in this map, because most of it has at least 3 levels. French 3rd Division gave up the ghost and turned tail and ran. I decided to throw the 1st and 2nd into a defensive order. 2nd forming a line up here, throwing some skirmishers in the way. The Spaniards will just pull away from it, but and then the 1st right outside of Quintana really couldn't shift things. I feel like you got kind of one turn to throw your defensive line together, and the way things were up here, I was just too far up in the hills to be able to pull back. I think the actual rules are you bolt the leader down at the place he was at. I don't feel like that allows, I think you should be allowed to fall back just a little bit at least without having to take the emergency withdrawal rules. I could have locked down with my leader up here, and then this whole line would be organized differently, which might actually make more sense, because as it stands, I've got kind of double depth there, but none of that's going to matter. The Spaniards are not going to launch an attack. They're in way too crappy a position. We had a random event, but no effect. Most of them don't have effect. So this was like an advanced reinforcements. Well, I'm on the same table no matter what. I did remember to roll though. All right into the Spanish turn. I was going to plug it and not, but I had my interview already, and you know, I'm a little too awake. Like I only napped for like an hour halfway or whatever, which kind of sucks because I have tomorrow I'm fine, but Wednesday I have to be awake. I don't know what time. Probably not leaving before 10, which means 9 or whatever. But yeah, this is where this system, and especially when you have all these little units, it's painful anyway, but I've got all these little units that have all got orders in play, and I think most of them look like they're X'd out one way or another. And none of them are on defensive orders except for the guys who were explicitly there. So now I've got to write a whole bunch of new orders because basically everything failed its withdrawal checks. But they fell back. But I'm not absolutely certain because some people had these like defend in front of Lona del Atac. You shouldn't write orders like that, right? Because that seems to imply that I should be going back there. But I also wouldn't have had an emergency withdrawal either. So, defend orders really are that. By the way the rules are, you're supposed to bolt your leader down and just sit there. But if you give a terrain objective, that begins to make everything all fuzzy, right? Because then, if your leader gets knocked back, shouldn't he be able to go back? But he's not. The defend orders, under any condition, are like, you're bolted down, which I don't really like. I feel like, if I've got a line of units and one unit with the leader falls back, I don't really feel like that qualifies as, I've had emergency withdrawal. It doesn't invoke emergency withdrawal, but what it does invoke is I'm on defensive orders, so the whole unit has to withdraw back there as if it were an emergency withdrawal, which just feels weird. This guy was a French guy, and he had to cut through his zones, but he would have recovered a little bit. He's actually... Yeah, because he got disordered, so his movement points got halved. So he had like 3.5. Right? I was kind of facing this way. 1, 2. Now I got 3 left. 1, 2. 1, 2. Drops me to 6, 3. Yeah, so I could make it to here. Okay. Into the 11 a.m. This is what we see. The Spaniards forming up a line. They're not under any orders. Probably cheating a little bit. Well, I know I'm cheating a little bit. I shifted some, this guy with a commander over one space so that I could align whatever this blue division is. I can look it up. I have that. That's the 3rd division over into place. And also, I don't think there are any. So this makes it more complicated because there's leaders like this, but he's part of the Asturian army, which has 3 commanders on it. It is kind of weird, but I think one of them is actually the center of command, but I'm not positive of that. Maybe not. So Acevedo takes the orders, but there doesn't seem to be anything which relates to how you would deal with like default defenses and whatnot. So maybe you can split the army of Astoria into 3 different little units. I don't know. But yeah, the whole bolting down doesn't really make sense when there's 3 leaders responsible for 1 command. There's no center defined that way. So I feel like there's, fuzziness, not just on my side, but on the side of the people who wrote this scenario in terms of how to cope with all of this. And had a couple of recovery rolls and whatnot. Recovery is more painful too, because I have to keep track of what the status of the different orders is. And I'm probably going to leave a blank space and head orders down below for these new orders that are forming. It's quite possible the French won't launch another attack. There's not, it looks like, you've gone less than half the daylight hours. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to get things moving, and those formations really have to recover. Did I cheat? Yeah, I did. There's no recovery available along this line. Oh, this guy succeeded in recovering one. That's this one, which he should not have, because he is less than 4 away from his enemy. So yeah, I mean, this second division here and the Spanish forces are not going to be allowed to recover, which, since I already decided the French were falling back, and this thing is probably never going to be able to fight, the real question is, well, at what point does the first division get good enough? Because honestly, the second division, I really would like to recover. It would recover more quickly, but unless I give it orders to pull back a little further, which I don't feel like I could do with the default defense. And I don't want an emergency withdrawal either. Which might mean Victor, on his turn, he hasn't given any orders, will head up this way. And he'll go talk to that. That happened back on the French turn. Just so I can write them orders to fall back. Because I would like to have another attack, and I don't feel like I can have that second attack unless I have 2 working divisions. And the fact that I'm going to allow the Spaniards to recover 2 might seem equally bad, but I think the French morale overall is a little higher. This might be time to load up, because there's not going to be any fighting for a while. The big question is, will there be any fighting? Because the scenario goes until, I think, 3:30. No, it goes until 4. So we make it into that 5 hex range. And as with all of these, if there's bitter fighting going on at the end of the day, and it might push, and it would push into night, I'm still going to allow that to happen. I'm not going to play another day. I think these armies are pretty beat up already. Like, I'm perfectly willing to say, yep, we had our fight, and count the score at this point. But you know what? If the French can get another attack in, that's fine. But they sure the hell aren't going to stick around for another day, and the Spaniards aren't either. They will clearly clear out. Whatever it is that's making the Spanish say, hey, I want these victory points, these 5 victory points that I have under control right now. Whatever's saying that they want those is going to disappear. Unlike the Blake withdrawals rule, which more or less says, well, if you did well on the first day, you can withdraw and pocket a victory, but you have to do really well. Like, you'd have to permanently wreck that 3rd division or something. Yeah, let's send this up and then see what happens in the remainder of this yucky day.